The Galactic Council Chamber was the largest room ever built by any living species. It floated in deep space aboard neutral station Tessara, far from any star or planet, and it held delegates from over 300 civilizations. The ceiling was so high it looked like an open sky. The walls curved in every direction, lined with seats, each one shaped differently for the bodies that filled them. Some delegates had wings, some had tails, some floated in liquid tanks, some did not have bodies at all, and appeared only as light on a screen. Today, every seat was full, and every seat was silent. On the massive central screen, footage was playing. It showed the Renari homeworld, a small green planet of rivers and low mountains, home to 1.2 billion gentle, soft-spoken beings who had never built a weapon in their entire history. The footage showed the Veil arriving. Their ships were not made of metal. They were made of flesh and bone, and dark tissue that pulsed like a heartbeat. The Veil did not invade worlds. They ate them. They consumed everything: people, animals, trees, water, soil. They wrapped themselves around a planet like a mouth closing over food, and when they were done, there was nothing left but rock and silence. The Renari had screamed for help. They sent messages to the Galactic Council for 11 days straight, 11 days of begging. Nobody came, nobody moved, and now the footage showed the last hours. Renari families holding each other. Renari children looking up at a sky that was turning black with Veil biomass. And then, static. Then, nothing. The screen went dark. For 7 long seconds, the chamber was completely quiet. Then the Tarani delegates stood up. The Tarani were tall, silver-skinned beings with 4 arms and deep voices. They were the oldest military alliance in the galaxy, and they believed they were the wisest species alive. The delegates spoke for 12 minutes about the importance of careful strategy and measured response. He used words like patience, long-term planning, and diplomatic framework. He said the Veil were dangerous, but that rushing into conflict would be worse. He sat down looking very pleased with himself. The Okari delegate spoke next. The Okari were small, quick creatures covered in short brown fur. They traded information. They bought and sold secrets the way others bought and sold food. The Okari delegate suggested economic sanctions. She listed 14 trade routes that could be disrupted. She presented charts. She used numbers and percentages. She never once mentioned the 1.2 billion dead Renari by name. Other delegates spoke. Some expressed sadness. Some expressed concern. Some expressed deep worry about the situation. None of them expressed any intention to actually do anything about it. In the far corner of the chamber, in a modest row of seats that most species walked past without noticing, the human delegation sat quietly. There were 5 of them. They wore simple dark uniforms. They had no guards, no assistants, no floating displays or hovering translation drones. They just sat and watched and listened, the way they had for 84 years. Ambassador Nari Yoon was at the center of the human row. She was a woman in her mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back and calm, steady eyes. She had a small notebook in her lap, and she had been writing in it throughout the session. Not typing on a screen, writing with a pen. Several alien delegates had stared at this like she was performing ancient magic. Nari had not spoken once during the entire session. Some delegates thought humans were too weak to care. Others thought they were too scared. The Okari intelligence file on humanity listed them as a Tier 6 civilization, which was 1 step above species that had not yet discovered fire. The file said humans were cooperative, polite, and completely harmless. The Drevni delegate did not agree with that file. He was an old warrior with cracked gray skin and deep orange eyes, and he sat across the chamber, watching the humans with an expression that no one else understood. He had not spoken either. But he was not watching the screen. He was watching Narayun's hands. They had stopped writing. Then the doors of the chamber opened, and the veiled delegate entered. It was not really a single being. It was a mass of wet, dark tissue, shaped roughly like a tall figure, dripping with biological residue. The smell hit the chamber like a wall. Several delegates covered their faces. The veiled delegate moved to the center of the floor, leaving a trail of slime behind it, and it spoke in a voice that sounded like many voices layered on top of each other. It thanked the council for their understanding. It said the Renari absorption was now complete. It said the Veiled Dominion looked forward to continued peaceful relations with all member species. It was still speaking when Narayun stood up. The movement was small. She simply rose from her seat. But something about it made the nearest delegate stop and look. Then more looked. Then the veiled delegate stopped talking. Then the entire chamber was staring at the human woman standing in the corner, with a pen in her hand. She asked one question. Her voice was not loud. It carried because the room was perfectly silent. Will anyone here act? Nobody answered. 7 seconds passed. 7 seconds of 300 civilizations saying nothing. Nari opened a private communication channel. On the other end, light years away on Earth, Admiral Doha Kang was standing in a military command center surrounded by every fleet commander and general in the human forces. He had been watching the session in real time. He saw Nari's face on his screen. She looked tired. Not angry, just tired. They won't, she said. Doha Kang was a man in his mid-50s with gray at his temples, and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone and then softened slightly by time. He had never raised his voice in any meeting. He had never fought a war. He had spent 30 years building something in silence, waiting for a moment he hoped would never come. He looked at his officers. He looked at the feed showing the dead Renari world. He took a slow breath. Fine, he said. We'll handle it ourselves then. She said, in that same calm voice, Earth withdraws from diplomatic arbitration on this matter. We will resolve it independently. Then she picked up her notebook, put her pen in her pocket, and walked out. Within minutes, the Okari detected a massive surge of encrypted human communications, flooding channels they did not know existed. The Tarani early warning systems found human ships moving from positions that were supposed to be empty space. The Drevni ambassador sent one message to his homeworld. It said, "It's happening. Do not interfere." Every major galactic power raised their threat level to the highest possible setting, not because they feared what the Veil would do next, but because they realized, after 84 years, that they had no idea what humanity actually was. And that silence from the human delegation, the silence they had mistaken for weakness, had never been weakness at all. It had been patience. And now, it was over. The first thing every intelligence agency in the galaxy did after Narayun walked out of that chamber was pull their files on humanity. Every species had one. The Tarani had a thick military assessment. The Okari had trade records and communication intercepts going back decades. The Drevni had a single file locked in a vault that only the Emperor could open. Every file said roughly the same thing. Humans were a young species. They had a small fleet. They were friendly and cooperative, and they kept to themselves. They were not a threat. Every single file was wrong. The Okari were the first to realize it. They were information brokers. Selling secrets was what they did, and they were very good at it. Within hours of Nari's departure, Okari analysts began scanning human space for fleet movements, trying to count ships and predict Earth's strategy. The official record said humanity had roughly 400 vessels, small ships, lightly armed. Enough for border patrol and cargo transport. Nothing more. The analysts counted 400 ships exactly where the records said they would be. Then they found more. A cluster of signals hiding in an asteroid field near the outer rim. Then another group tucked behind a dying star in the Verath Nebula. Then more in deep space, in places so empty that no species had ever thought to look there. The numbers kept climbing. 500, 1,000, 3,000, 7,000. The final count was just under 12,000 warships. The senior Okari analyst, a nervous creature with quick hands and wide eyes, presented the findings to the Okari Leadership Council. Her voice was shaking. She said that humanity had been building ships in secret for approximately 80 years. They had hidden construction yards inside hollowed-out asteroids and abandoned moons. They had supply lines running through regions of space that were officially listed as empty. They had been doing this quietly, carefully, and with a level of discipline that the Okari had never seen from any species. One council member asked how this was possible. How could a Tier 6 civilization hide 12,000 ships? The analyst swallowed hard and said that was the wrong question. The right question was whether humanity was ever really Tier 6 at all. Across the galaxy, the Terani Federation was having its own crisis. Terani Military Command had gathered every record of human performance in joint exercises, war games, and training operations over the past 50 years. Humans always performed poorly in these events. They scored in the bottom third. Their tactics were simple. Their ships were slow. Their officers seemed confused by basic formations. The Terani had used this data for decades to confirm what everyone already believed, that humans were not a military species. Now a young Terani officer named was going through the records frame by frame, and she found something that made her blood go cold. The humans had not performed poorly. They had performed poorly on purpose. Every mistake was too clean. Every failure was too controlled. In one war game from 30 years ago, a human captain had used a formation so outdated it had not been seen in centuries. But when the officer mapped the formation against the Terani fleet's positioning, she realized the human captain had been testing the Terani response time without anyone noticing. He had learned exactly how fast the Terani could react, and the Terani had been too busy laughing at his bad tactics to see what he was doing. It was the same pattern in every exercise. Humans always lost, but they always lost in ways that gave them information. They had spent 50 years studying every species in the galaxy while pretending to be the worst students in the room. The Terani officer presented this to her superiors. The room was very quiet when she finished. One general said, "They were watching us." The officer shook her head. "No, sir. They were learning us." The Drevni response was different from everyone else's. The Drevni were an ancient warrior species, proud and serious, with skin like cracked stone and voices that rumbled like distant thunder. 60 years ago, a Drevni scouting fleet had encountered a small group of human ships near a disputed border. The Drevni commander had decided to test these soft, strange beings. He fired warning shots. The humans did not run. What happened next had been classified at the highest level of the Drevni Empire. The Emperor now summoned the only surviving officer from that encounter, an old general with scars across his face and hands that trembled when he spoke about that day. The general told the truth. The humans had boarded the Drevni flagship in 4 minutes. They did not use energy weapons or heavy armor. They used cutting tools, magnetic clamps, and small devices that disabled the ship's systems one by one. They moved through the ship like water flowing through cracks. They adapted to the Drevni layout in real time, as if they had practiced in a perfect copy of the vessel. They disabled the engines, the weapons, the communications, and the life support backup systems. Then they turned the life support back on. Then they left. They left the entire crew alive, every single one. The Emperor asked his general what should be done. The general said one word: nothing. He said the humans had shown them mercy 60 years ago. That mercy was not weakness. It was a message. The message was simple. We can reach you anywhere. We chose not to hurt you. Remember that. The Emperor ordered the Drevny military to stand down completely and wait. Meanwhile, aboard the ESS Horizon, Earth's flagship stealth carrier, Captain Una Park stood before her crew in the main briefing room. The Horizon was enormous, longer than most space stations, but it moved through space like a shadow. Its hull was coated in materials that absorbed every form of detection, from heat sensors to gravity scanners to biological sonar. To the rest of the galaxy, the Horizon did not exist. Una was a woman in her early 30s, with sharp eyes and a voice that never wasted a word. She laid out the mission. They were going into the heart of Veil space. They were going to destroy the Nexus nodes, the biological relay points that held the Veil hive mind together. Without those nodes, the Veil would not just lose their coordination, they would lose their ability to think. Lieutenant Jiho Baek, the ship's tactical officer, stood beside her. He was young, mid-20s, thin and quiet, the kind of person most people forgot was in the room until he started talking. He had spent 3 years mapping the Veil's neural communication network from intercepted signals. He had found the weak points. He had found the pattern. He put the map on screen, and the crew stared at it in silence. It looked like a web of light, spreading across dozens of star systems, and Jiho had marked every critical node in red. Then Dr. Hana Lim appeared on a holographic screen. She was calling from a hidden research facility that did not appear on any map. She was the chief scientist of Project Forge, humanity's classified weapons division. She was in her late 40s, with warm eyes and a gentle voice, and she had spent 30 years building a weapon specifically designed to kill the Veil. It was a targeted energy pulse that could collapse Veil neural tissue at the molecular level, without damaging anything else around it. No radiation, no collateral destruction, just silence where there was once a mind. She had built it and waited. She had hoped she would never have to use it. That hope was gone now. Admiral Doha Kang addressed every ship in the fleet through a single broadcast. He did not give a dramatic speech. He spoke quietly, the way he always did. He said, "The Renari asked for help. The galaxy looked away. We do not look away. You all know what to do." 12,000 ships moved as one, and across the galaxy, every species with a sensor array watched in disbelief as humanity stopped pretending. On the first day, the Veil Dominion did not understand what was happening. They had spent 10,000 years consuming civilizations. They had eaten species that were older than most stars. No one had ever attacked them across more than one front at a time, because no species had ever been bold enough or foolish enough to try. The standard approach was to pick one Veil system, throw everything at it, lose half your fleet, and then retreat while the Veil regrew whatever you had managed to destroy. Humanity did not follow the standard approach. 17 Veil systems were hit simultaneously, not one after another, not in waves, all at the same time, down to the second. Human fleets appeared out of empty space in perfect formation and opened fire before the Veil even registered their presence. In the Korath system, a Veil defense cluster of 800 bioships was shattered in 40 minutes by a human strike group 1/3 its size. In the Velos system, human bombers dropped sever charges on a Nexus node from such a high angle that the Veil's biological sensors could not track them. The node collapsed. Every Veil unit connected to it went still, their bodies freezing mid-motion like puppets with cut strings. The Veil hive mind tried to adapt. It pulled forces from outlying systems to reinforce the cores. It had done this 1,000 times before against other enemies. Consolidate, regroup, consume the attacker from the inside. But when the Veil forces arrived at their consolidation points, human ships were already there, waiting. Lieutenant Jiho Baek had predicted every possible retreat pattern the hive mind could choose. He had mapped them months ago. The Veil were not retreating to safety, they were retreating into traps. Captain Una Park, and the ESS Horizon moved through Veil-controlled space like a ghost. The Horizon's stealth systems were so advanced that the ship produced almost no heat, no electromagnetic signature, no gravitational ripple. The Veil's biological sensors, which could detect a heartbeat from orbit, could not find the Horizon even when it was close enough to touch their stations. Yuna brought the ship directly above a primary nexus node in the Drax system, one of the 4 central relay points for the entire Veil hive mind. She gave the order. The Horizon launched the first full-power Sever strike. The weapon made no sound. There was no explosion. A pulse of precisely tuned energy passed through the nexus node, and the node simply stopped. Billions of neural connections collapsed at once. 3 Veil fleets spread across 2 star systems lost contact with each other instantly. Ships that had been moving in coordinated attack patterns began to drift. Soldiers on the ground stopped walking. Entire hive structures went dark. It was as if someone had reached into the Veil's brain and turned off a section of it. By the 3rd day, the Veil Nexus, the central intelligence that controlled the entire Dominion, began to feel something it had not felt in 10,000 years. It did not have a word for it at first, because it had never needed one. Eventually it found the word in the memories of a species it had consumed long ago. The word was fear. The Nexus tried new strategies. It sent its fastest bioships on suicide runs toward Earth's supply lines. Sergeant Taeho Shin's quiet walkers were waiting. Taeho was a man built like a wall, who moved like smoke. His unit had been inserted behind Veil lines before the war even started, planted on occupied worlds under deep cover. When the Veil sent their forces outward, Taeho's teams hit the undefended hive structures from inside. They moved through the pulsing organic corridors in complete silence, planting sever charges at neural junction points, cutting communication lines, opening sealed chambers where captive species were being held for absorption. On the Veil-held world of Tisava, Taeho's team found 40,000 captives from 6 different species, all of them sealed in organic pods, slowly being dissolved. The team worked for 11 hours without stopping. They cut every pod open. They carried the ones who could not walk. They moved all 40,000 beings to extraction points without firing a single shot. When the last transport lifted off, Taeho triggered the sever charges. The hive structure collapsed behind them like a dying animal, letting out its last breath. By the 5th day, the galaxy was watching. Humanity had made the decision to broadcast raw, unedited combat footage on open channels. Not propaganda, not polished reports. Just the actual footage from helmet cameras, ship sensors, and orbital platforms. Every species with a screen could watch in real time. The Terrani military analysts watched with their mouths open. What they saw did not match any model of warfare they had ever studied. Human soldiers did not fight like machines. They did not follow rigid patterns. Each one of them seemed to make independent tactical decisions in fractions of a second, adapting to what was happening around them without waiting for orders. A squad would enter a Veil structure with one plan and change it 6 times in 2 minutes, based on what they found inside. A ship captain would abandon her assigned attack vector mid-flight because she noticed a weakness in the enemy formation that nobody else had seen. One Terrani analyst, watching footage of a single human pilot outmaneuvering 12 Vial bioships by flying through the wreckage of a destroyed station, whispered to his colleague, "They are not following a plan. They are the plan, every single one of them." By the 7th day, the Nexus was desperate. For the first time in its existence, it sent a message to the Galactic Council. It was a plea for help. It used words like mercy and negotiation and peaceful resolution, words it had stolen from the languages of species it had eaten. The irony was not lost on anyone. The Council convened an emergency session, Delegates argued for hours about whether to intervene. Some said this was going too far. Some said humanity needed to be stopped before it became the next Viel. The Drevny delegate sat in silence through all of it. When the vote was called, he stood and said, "The humans gave you a chance to act. You chose silence. This is what silence costs." No one voted to intervene. Ambassador Narration was not present at the session. She had sent a short written note. It said, "We're busy." On the 9th day, Admiral Doha Kang gave the final order. The remaining Nexus nodes were targeted simultaneously. Every Sever-equipped ship in the fleet fired at the same moment. Dr. Hana Lim watched the data from her lab, her hands steady, her eyes locked on her screens. She had built this weapon. She had spent 30 years on it. She watched it do exactly what it was designed to do. The Veil neural network collapsed. It did not happen slowly. It happened all at once, like a vast web of light flickering and going dark. Across dozens of star systems, billions of Veil drones stopped moving. Bioships went still in space, their organic engines dying, their hulls beginning to decay. Hive structures on occupied worlds sagged and crumbled as the intelligence holding them together disappeared. The Nexus itself, a planet-sized biological intelligence that had existed for 10,000 years, that had consumed 40 civilizations and trillions of lives, sent one final transmission before its neural network collapsed completely. The transmission was directed at the human fleet. It was not a threat. It was not a curse. It was a question. What are you? Nobody answered. The Nexus went dark. The Veil Dominion, which had been the oldest and most feared predator in the galaxy, was gone. Not retreating, not diminished, gone. The war had lasted 9 days. Aboard the Horizon, Captain Una Park stood on the bridge and watched the last Veil signals fade from her tactical display. The bridge crew was silent. Nobody cheered. Nobody celebrated. They just sat at their stations and stared at screens that showed nothing but empty space where an empire used to be. Una looked at her crew. She looked at Jiho Beck, who was sitting very still with his hands in his lap. She looked at the communications officer, who had tears running down her face. She looked out at the stars. 9 days, that was all it had taken. And now the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. The war was over. The Veil Dominion was gone. 40 civilizations that had lived under its shadow for thousands of years were suddenly free. The galaxy should have been celebrating. Instead, every homeworld, every fleet command, every intelligence agency, and every government office in known space was gripped by a single, quiet, suffocating emotion. Fear. Not fear of the Veil. The Veil were dead. Fear of the species that had killed them in 9 days. The Tyranny Federation held an emergency military summit within 48 hours of the war's end. Their most senior generals gathered in a sealed chamber deep beneath the surface of their homeworld. The room was cold and gray, built for conversations that could not be overheard. For the first 3 hours, they argued. Some generals wanted to form a preemptive coalition. They said humanity had revealed itself as the most dangerous force in the galaxy, and if the Tyranny did not act now, they might never get another chance. Others said this was insanity. They pointed to the footage. They pointed to the numbers. They said that fighting humanity was not a question of strategy. It was a question of survival. Then a young officer stood up. She had spent the last 2 days running calculations. She put her data on the main screen and said something that ended the argument. She said that during the 9-day war, humanity had deployed approximately 4% of its revealed fleet capacity. 4%. The room went silent. One general leaned forward and asked her to repeat the number. She repeated it. 4%. The general sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "We are not discussing whether we can fight them. We are discussing whether we would survive the attempt." The summit ended without a decision, which was itself a decision. The Okari Collective responded the way they always did. They tried to gather information and sell it. The Okari had built their entire civilization on being the galaxy's information brokers. They knew everything about everyone. That was their power. That was their identity. Except they did not know anything about humanity, and now they discovered something far worse than ignorance. Somi Cha, Earth's intelligence director, had been running a shadow operation against the Okari for over 20 years. She had identified every Okari intelligence agent operating in human space. She had not arrested them. She had not blocked them. She had fed them information. Carefully selected, perfectly believable, completely false information. The Okari had been collecting human data for decades, analyzing it, packaging it, and selling it to every species in the galaxy. Every piece of it was exactly what Sami wanted them to sell. The Okari leadership discovered this when they tried to cross-reference their human files with the actual fleet numbers that had appeared during the war. Nothing matched. Not the ship counts, not the technology levels, not the communication protocols, not the weapons capabilities. Everything was wrong. Everything had always been wrong. They had not been intelligence brokers gathering secrets about humanity. They had been delivery vehicles, carrying Sami Cha's disinformation to every corner of the galaxy. The Okari trade leader sat in her office staring at the wall for a very long time after receiving this report. Then she called her senior analyst and asked a question she had never asked before. What do we actually know about the humans? The analyst thought about it. She said, what they wanted us to know, which means we know nothing. The Drevni Empire reacted differently from everyone else. There was no panic. No emergency summits. No desperate recalculations. The Emperor simply gathered his council in the ancient stone hall where the Drevni had made decisions for 12,000 years, and he spoke plainly. He said that 60 years ago, the humans defeated a Drevni scouting fleet and let every single warrior live. He said that 9 days ago, the humans destroyed the most powerful predator in galactic history. He said that right now, 12,000 human warships were sitting in Vale space, and not a single one of them had moved toward any other civilization's territory. He said that the pattern was clear. They are not conquerors, the Emperor said. They do not want our worlds. They do not want our resources. They do not want our submission. But they are something more dangerous than conquerors. They are patient. They waited 84 years. They watched us. They learned us. And when the moment came, they moved with a speed and precision that tells me they were ready decades ago. They chose to wait. That kind of discipline is more frightening than any weapon. He ordered the Drevni military to remain completely still. No mobilizations, no defensive formations, nothing that could be mistaken for a threat. He said, we will wait, as they waited, and we will see what kind of species they choose to be now that the galaxy knows what they are. Aboard the ESS Horizon, floating in the ruins of Vale space, Captain Una Park walked through her ship and felt the silence. It was not the good silence of a job well done. It was the heavy silence of people carrying something they were not sure they could hold. She found Lieutenant Jiho Beck alone in the tactical operations room. He was sitting in front of his screens, but they were turned off. His hands were on the table, and he was staring at them as if they belonged to someone else. Una sat down across from him and waited. She was good at waiting. After a long time, Jiho spoke. His voice was very quiet. He said, we killed a species today. Not an army, not a government, a species. The Nexus was alive. It was old. It was thinking. It had a mind. And we turned it off. He looked at her. His eyes were red. I mapped every node. I found every weakness. I designed the attack sequence. That means I killed it. Specifically me. Yuna did not tell him he was wrong. She did not tell him it was necessary. She did not say any of the easy things that would have let him feel better for a moment, and worse forever. Instead, she said, "Yes, you did, and so did I, and so did every person on this ship, and every ship in this fleet. We ended something that had existed for 10,000 years. That is supposed to feel heavy, Jiho. That weight is important. The day we stopped feeling it is the day we become what they were." He nodded slowly. He did not look better. But he looked like someone who had been told the truth, and that was enough for now. Admiral Doha Kang sat in his office on Earth and watched the communications pile up on his screen. Messages from the Tarani requesting an emergency summit. Messages from the Okari offering trade agreements. Messages from a dozen smaller species asking for protection. Messages from species he had never heard of. Species that had been hiding from the veil for centuries, now coming out of the darkness and asking if it was really over. He did not answer any of them. Not yet. He opened a private channel to Ambassador Narration. She was still on neutral station Tessara, still sitting in the same quarters she had occupied for years. She looked tired. Not defeated. Just the kind of tired that comes from carrying a weight for a very long time. Doha said, "We're ready to talk. But this time, they'll listen." Nari nodded. "The question is whether they'll hear." In her lab, Dr. Hana Lim stood before the Sever protocol systems and gave an order that surprised her entire team. She told them to begin dismantling it. Everything. The weapon, the delivery systems, the research data, all of it. One of her senior engineers asked why. The weapon worked. It was the most effective thing humanity had ever built. Why destroy it? Hana looked at him with those warm, steady eyes and said, "Because I built it for the Veil. Only the Veil. It was designed to end one specific threat, and that threat is gone. I do not build weapons that outlive their purpose. The moment a weapon exists without a specific enemy, it starts looking for one. I will not let that happen." The engineer stared at her. Then he nodded. They began taking it apart that same day. And across the galaxy, in council chambers and war rooms and quiet offices on 100 different worlds, the leaders of every civilization sat with the same thought turning over and over in their minds. Humanity had the power to do anything. They had ships, weapons, intelligence networks, and capabilities that no one had even imagined. They could conquer every world in the galaxy, and no one could stop them. So what were they going to do? The galaxy held its breath and waited to find out. 6 months passed. The galaxy did not go to war. It did not form coalitions or alliances against Earth. It did not do much of anything except wait and watch and wonder. Humanity had gone quiet again after the Veil War, which made everyone more nervous than the war itself. When a species that could destroy an empire in 9 days goes silent, every possible explanation is terrifying. Then the Galactic Council announced a full session. Every member species was invited. The agenda had one item. The human delegation had requested the floor. The chamber on neutral station Tessara filled faster than it had ever filled before. Every seat was taken. Delegates who usually sent junior representatives came in person. The Tarani sent their highest-ranking admiral alongside their diplomatic team. The Okari sent their entire leadership council, all 12 of them, which had never happened in the history of the collective. The Drevni sent their emperor himself, an ancient being who had not left his homeworld in 40 years. Smaller species that had been in hiding for centuries sent delegates for the very first time, blinking in the bright lights of the chamber, unsure of where to sit. Everyone was looking at the entrance. Everyone was waiting for the humans. Ambassador Nari Yoon walked in at exactly the scheduled time. She was wearing the same simple dark outfit she had always worn. Her hair was pulled back the same way. She carried the same small notebook. She walked to the same seat she had occupied for years and sat down. She smiled politely at the delegates near her. She opened her notebook. Nothing about her had changed, and that, more than anything, was what frightened the 300 civilizations watching her. They had expected armor. They had expected a show of force. They had expected the humans to walk in looking like conquerors. Instead, they got the same quiet woman, with the same pen, acting as if the most devastating military campaign in galactic history was simply something that had happened and was now over. When it was time, Nari stood. The chamber was already silent, but somehow it got quieter. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of as many delegates as she could. Then she began to speak. She did not talk about the war. She did not mention the veil. She did not list humanity's capabilities or describe their weapons or their fleet. She did not threaten anyone. She did not warn anyone. Instead, she apologized. She said that humanity owed the galaxy an apology, not for destroying the veil, but for taking so long to act. She said that for 84 years, Earth had sat in this chamber and watched. They had watched species suffer. They had watched the veil consume world after world, while humanity hid its strength and said nothing, did nothing, because they were afraid of being seen. She said that the Renari were dead because of that fear. 1.2 billion people had died, screaming for help, while humanity sat on a fleet of 12,000 ships and a weapons program that could have stopped the veil at any time. She said that every day humanity stayed hidden was a day they chose their own comfort over someone else's life. And she said that was something her species would carry with them for a very long time. The chamber was completely still. Several delegates looked at each other in confusion. They had expected demands. They had expected terms of surrender or declarations of dominance. They had not expected guilt. Then Nari laid out a proposal. She called it the Compact of Open Hands. It was not a treaty of submission. It was not a military alliance with humanity at the top. It was a mutual agreement, equal for every species that signed it, built on two simple ideas. The first idea was transparency. Humanity would share everything it had hidden. Its technology, its medical advances, its agricultural science, its energy systems, everything that Project Forge had developed, everything that Somi Cha's intelligence network had gathered, everything that the fleet had built and tested in secret over 8 decades. All of it would be made available to every species in the galaxy. No cost, no conditions, no strings. The second idea was a single rule. One rule for the entire galaxy. No species would be consumed, conquered, or erased, while others stood by and watched, ever again. If any civilization was threatened with destruction, every signatory of the compact would act. Not debate, not discuss, not form committees. Act. Nari paused. She closed her notebook. She said, "We are not your rulers. We are not your protectors. We are not asking to lead you. We are your neighbors, and neighbors help each other. Not because they are afraid, not because they are forced to, but because it is right." She sat down. For a moment, nobody moved. The weight of what she had said settled over the chamber like something physical, like a blanket laid over the shoulders of every person in the room. The Drevni Emperor stood first. He was old, his gray skin cracked with age, his orange eyes dim but steady. He looked at Nari for a long time. Then he spoke in a voice that rumbled through the chamber like distant stones shifting underground. He said, 60 years ago, your people defeated my fleet. You could have destroyed every ship, and killed every warrior on board. Instead, you disabled our vessels and left us alive. I spent 60 years wondering why. I thought it was arrogance. I thought it was a warning. I did not understand." He paused. "Now, I understand. You treated my warriors as people worth keeping alive, even though they had attacked you first. No species has ever done that to the Drevni." He placed his hand over his chest, the Drevni gesture of binding oath. "The Drevni Empire joins the compact." The Tarani delegate stood next. She was tall and silver-skinned, and her 4 hands were clasped tightly together. She looked uncomfortable, like someone swallowing something that tasted bad but was necessary. She said, "We feared you. We feared you before the war, and we fear you more now. I do not think that fear will go away quickly." She took a breath. "But you are right. Fear is a poor foundation for the future. And you have offered something better." She nodded once. "The Tarani Federation joins the compact." Then the Okari trade leader stood. She was small, and her voice was quiet, but the chamber heard every word. She said, "You fooled us. For 20 years, your intelligence director fed us false information, and we spread it across the galaxy without knowing. We are supposed to be the smartest species in this room, and you made us look like fools." She paused. A very small smile crossed her face. "I find that I am not angry about this. I am impressed. The Okari Collective joins the compact, but we would like to have a conversation with Director Somi Cha at her earliest convenience." A ripple of something that might have been laughter moved through the chamber. Then the smaller species began to stand, one by one, species that had been hiding for centuries, species that had lost their homeworlds, species that had been too small and too weak to matter in any previous galactic arrangement. They stood, and they said their names, some of them saying their names in the council chamber for the very first time. A delegate from a species that the Veil had nearly consumed 40 years ago stood on shaking legs and said, "We have been afraid for so long that we forgot what it felt like to not be afraid. If this compact can give us that, we will sign it with everything we have." In his office on Earth, Admiral Doha Kang watched the session through a live feed. Standing behind him, also watching, were Captain Yuna Park, Lieutenant Jiho Beck, Dr. Hana Lim, Sergeant Taeho Shin, and Intelligence Director Somi Cha. The 6 people who had carried the weight of this war stood together in a small room and watched 300 civilizations stand up, one after another, and choose something better than fear. Nobody spoke for a long time. Yuna had her arms crossed. Jiho's eyes were wet. Hana was smiling softly. Taeho stood perfectly still, as he always did. Somi's face was unreadable, as it always was. Though if anyone had looked closely, they might have seen a slight tremor in her jaw. Doha Kang watched the last delegate sit down. He watched Nari Yoon open her notebook and begin writing again, as if this were just another session. He watched the chamber full of species that had feared each other for millennia, now looking around with something new in their eyes. Something careful and fragile and real. He said very quietly, "That's all we ever wanted. For someone to stand up." Yuna looked at him. A lot of them stood up today. "Yes," Doha said. "They did." Far away, on a small Okari trading station at the edge of known space, a child watched the broadcast with her parent. The child was young, with big dark eyes and soft brown fur, and she did not understand most of what was happening. But she could see that the adults around her were acting strangely. Some were crying, some were talking very fast, some were just sitting and staring at the screen with expressions she had never seen before. She tugged on her parent's arm and asked, "Why is everyone talking about the humans?" Her parent looked down at her. The parent thought about it for a moment, trying to find the right words for a child. Because they did what everyone else was afraid to do, the parents said. And then they asked for nothing in return. The child frowned. She thought about this. It did not match anything she knew about how the galaxy worked. In her experience, everyone always wanted something. Everyone always had a price. The idea that someone would do something enormous and then simply ask others to be kind to each other was strange. It was so strange that it almost did not make sense. "That's weird," she said. Her parents smiled. "Yes," the parents said. "That is what makes them terrifying."